The WWE is one of the most legendary sports entertainment companies of all time. And while these legends made fans starstruck on Saturday mornings, behind the scenes, the employees were living in their own personal hell. So the real question is, why was the WWE a living nightmare? Well, it can be attributed to one man, Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon was the owner of the WWE and played a villain as a psychopathic businessman. Little did fans know that this character was a glimpse at his real personality. Vince McMahon is the son of Vincent McMahon. Before the WWE, wrestling was divided into territories, with Vince McMahon being a promoter to the Northeast Territory, otherwise known as the WWF. Vince wanted to take over his father's legacy, but his father didn't want him to because the wrestling industry wasn't lucrative at the time. Vince's father even sent him to be a promoter in Bangor, Maine, where he taped the matches and sent them across the country to be broadcast on television. Then when Vincent McMahon was dying of cancer, Vince bought the WWF, wanting to eventually become a national promoter. When wrestling was still divided between territories, wrestlers used to charge a fee to do matches that were outside of their territory. Vince eventually put an end to this by restricting WWF wrestlers from wrestling in other territories. The WWF eventually became the prime territory by signing wrestlers such as Andre the Giant, Hulk Hogan, Rocky Johnson, Mr. T, and many more. Vince eventually expanded the WWF beyond the Northeast region and purchased Saturday morning time slots for the matches to be broadcast on a national level. Over time, Vince eventually started taking over other territories, eventually leading to July 14th, 1984, otherwise known as Black Saturday. This is when Vince went on WTBS's Saturday morning time slot that normally broadcasted Georgia Championship Wrestling and announced that the WWF was taking over. It was clear that wrestlers and promoters were not happy about Vince's position and power. The notorious WWE commentator, Jim Ross, even said he heard NWA members devising a plan to kill McMahon. Over time, the WWF became the national leaders in wrestling promotion. They signed other wrestlers such as The Undertaker, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H, The Rock, and many more. And as they grew in popularity, so did the expectations for their matches. This led to unique matches such as ladder matches, table matches, cage matches, and even dumpster matches. And the more acrobatic the matches became, the more likely something would go wrong. On May 23rd, 1999, Owen Hart, otherwise known as the Blue Blazer, died from an entrance stunt where he was flying over a crowd into the ring and fell 90 feet. He suffered from internal bleeding and died in the ring. This was a heavy loss for the wrestling community, but Vince said the show must go on, and they proceeded like nothing happened. This occurred amidst the Attitude Era, which is known to be the prime era of the WWE. This is where the WWE consisted of storylines and beef. Vince McMahon even created his own character who was an insane, power-hungry, and oddly pathetic businessman. During this era, if you didn't have your own storyline, then the writers would either create you one, or worse, Vince McMahon would write it himself. Vince McMahon's storylines would be some of the most bizarre storylines in wrestling history. Vince created one where he and his son, Shane McMahon, would face off against Shawn Michaels and God. Vince and Shane won in the end, which offended fans with the symbolic message of Vince being greater than God.
I told you, Shawn, God's not here tonight. God has abandoned you.
Another McMahon storyline is when a 77-year-old wrestling legend, Mae Young, was pregnant with Mark Henry's child, and when Mae gave birth to the child, it was a hand. While some of these storylines seem weird but harmless, some actually ended up being quite disturbing, such as when Kane got in a car crash with his longtime girlfriend who ultimately died. Kane then attended her open casket, fondled her corpse, and drank the blood from her internal organs. Or when Chris Jericho kidnapped Chyna and tortured her. Chris then beat Chyna with a hammer and accidentally broke her thumb in real life. These are just a few examples of Vince McMahon's twisted storylines, but they were even much worse when women were involved. Trish was the scripted mistress for Vince, where her character was made to sleep with the boss in order to advance in the company. Vince eventually made her bark like a dog on live television and even almost made her join the infamous Kiss My Ass Club. Vince even created a storyline with Trish and his wife Linda, where Linda was written to be severely ill and required 24-hour nursing care. He then brought her out on live television to make out with Trish in front of her. On top of that, Vince also wrote a whole scene where his kids repeatedly slapped their own mother. And while these storylines were bad for Trish and Linda, they do not compare to the storylines for Vince's daughter, Stephanie, such as when Stephanie was about to marry Test, but then the ceremony was interrupted with a video of Triple H saying he drugged, kidnapped, married, and slept with Stephanie while she was unconscious. There's also the infamous I Quit match, where Vince brutally wrestled Stephanie until Stephanie's mom threw in the towel. Vince even wanted to write a storyline when Stephanie was actually pregnant with Triple H's baby, and Vince wanted to claim it as his own. When Stephanie said no, he then proposed the idea of his son, aka Stephanie's brother Shane, to be the baby daddy. Vince also wrote the infamous bra and panties matches, wet t-shirt contests, and spanking matches. He also wrote storylines where women had to do sexual favors for Vince in order to advance in the company. Although this was fictional, looking back, these were just glimpses at Vince's true character. In 1986, former WWE referee Rita Chatterton alleged that Vince McMahon sexually assaulted her in the back of a limousine. Chatterton then came out in 2022, bringing more attention to this crime. However, no charges were filed and McMahon denied these allegations. Then in 1992, wrestler Kevin Wackles, aka Nails, accused Vince McMahon of sexual harassment, claiming McMahon made inappropriate advances towards him. This allegation arose after Nails was fired following a physical altercation with McMahon over pay issues. But things really took a turn in 2022, where a Wall Street Journal report revealed that Vince McMahon allegedly paid over $12 million in settlements to 4 women to cover up claims of sexual misconduct. This led to the WWE's board launching an internal investigation into whether company funds were used to pay these settlements. But most recently, in January of 2024, former WWE employee Janelle Grant came out exposing Vince McMahon of sexual assault, trafficking, and extreme emotional abuse. McMahon made promises to Grant of career advancement, but exploited and trafficked her instead. Vince's sexual demands began to grow throughout Grant's employment. Disturbing details include incidents where McMahon allegedly defecated on her, forced her into unwanted sexual situations, and shared explicit images of her without consent. These accusations against McMahon only scratch the surface of all the horrible acts he's done. Luckily, in January of 2023, Vince McMahon announced his retirement from the WWE. And while it is great that McMahon removed himself from the company, this still does not fix the abuse that he put his employees through. Although Vince McMahon created one of the most notorious empires in sports entertainment, he will forever go down in infamy.